We are recording, so I have to watch my P's and Q's again.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is Dave DeBow with another one of our Zooming In with Dave calls. And today, our special guest expert is someone really special, and someone who I think you're going to get massive value from listening to, Mr. Barry McGuire. I've known Barry for a long time, and I was trying to remember back when to when we first met Barry, but I've definitely known of Barry an even longer time because Barry was very involved with RAIN, the Real Estate Investment Network, and I mean, I joined RAIN when I first came back to Canada in 2003. I think you were rocking and rolling it with RAIN back then, Barry. And that's when I first became aware of him. And then through good fortune, I was fortunate enough to get to know Barry. And back when I was doing a lot of rent-to-own deals myself and teaching and training people about rent-to-own, I had the pleasure of having Barry drive all the way out to Kamloops, for crying out loud, and speak at one of my rent-to-own events. And that was great. And what I really appreciate about Barry is that he's a real estate lawyer, so he knows law, especially when it comes to real estate inside and out, and that's great. That's awesome. What's even better is that he is an active real estate investor himself. He's got a significant portfolio. He's been in the trenches with the rest of us for many years, so he's not just helping people, you know, from the lawyer side of things, but he really understands it inside and out from the investor side of things. And as if that weren't enough, Barry is also extremely astute when it comes to creative real estate investing strategies, which A, is unusual at the best of times. B, when it comes to a lawyer being at all the least bit creative with damn near anything, that's exceptional in my experience. Okay, so having a real estate lawyer who really understands creative deals is phenomenal. And then to top it all off, Barry is based in Alberta, and you know, we all know that Alberta definitely has its ups and its downs with the real estate market. In fact, it's been in a down market for quite some time. So really this, yeah, of course the COVID thing is brand new for everybody, but doing deals in a challenging real estate market is not new for Barry or any of the real estate investors in Alberta who've been doing this for over 10 years. They're kind of used to markets not completely cooperating the way we'd like them to. So he's very experienced with that. And to top it all off, probably the best thing I like about Barry is he makes some damn good jam. An amazing jam maker. So let's give Barry a big virtual round of applause. We won't be able to hear it because you got every eye on mute, but welcome, Mr. Barry McGuire. Great to have you on, my friend.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for that. And I have two things to say to you at this very moment. Donna tells me that there are folks asking for the password so they can get into the session. So I'm not sure what we do about that, but that's what the great Donna says. He's right next to me on her own computer.
Okay.
Watching things, kind of keeping an eye on what the heck.
Thank God for Donna. We'd both be screwed and up the creek without your lovely wife, my friend. She's
I know. It's true.
Hey, Donna, I'll email something to you, I guess. But basically, it'd be the same link you guys clicked on.
Yeah,
that should do it.
That's what Donna thought, but I don't know, some glitching thing. Donna, you'll watch that and try and just keep us up to speed in case there's something we can do.
I'll try and email you, Donna. Yep.
And the second thing, Dave, is that yesterday I made some jam.
There you go.
I did. We were working in our freezer because guess what? You know, you're looking for what you have for provisions. And I found some yellow raspberries and and a smaller amount of black raspberries. And I was looking for about 1 kilo of raspberries in order to make one batch of raspberry jam. That's what I need. And I put them on the scale, and guess what? The yellow and the black, about sort of 80% one, 20% the other, added up to 1 kilo. So I put them all in a pot, and we turned it into jam, and it looks just like regular red raspberry jam. So it's weird. This batch of yellow and black turns out to be red raspberry, and it's delicious, by the way. Delicious.
I believe it. So you guys, I think you can probably hear that Barry's pretty passionate about his jams, and it reflects in how damn good they are. So here you go, Don. I'm going to send you the invitation link, which should work for everybody. So go ahead and get that to anybody that you'd like. And sorry, you guys, for the glitches, but here we're keeping it real. This is all about keeping it real.
All right.
All right. So Barry, how would you like us to roll here today when it comes to talking about creative strategies and, you know, how you think those might be applied in our current situation, or what you think might work best?
Okay. Well, I think we can have a general discussion about creative strategies, just some of the general principles that I think are important for anybody who's, I guess, thinking about stepping out from the classic long-term buy and hold, and who wants to at least think about or even get started in creative strategies, and also for people who have maybe taken one of my focus workshops, who understand or are already involved in creative strategies. And so my general comment, I guess, is related to the circumstances that we're all in today. I mean, we're in the midst of a COVID lockdown. We are in the midst of just starting, I guess, what's predicted to be a nasty recession. The government is, of course, throwing bucket loads of money at all kinds of the issues that COVID is revealing to us. But I don't know that the bucket loads of money are going to stop the recession from taking hold, or at least, you know, they're even talking about a depression. They're talking about, you know, something severe. The dirty 30s, the crash of 1929. They're talking about that sort of thing. And if it's not a depression, it's going to be a deep recession. And what does that mean? What does that mean for us? Well, I mean, overall, there's a big element to creative strategies that say your best opportunities for some of the strategies turn up when times are bad. And when folks, just plain folks, get caught in circumstances beyond their control, and they need to do something with a property, and they can't do it because of the economy or the down times, as it were. So that's a classic time for some strategies to apply. And here in Alberta, for the past 5 years, because we've been we've had a flat to neutral market for the past 5 years. The agreement for sale strategy, where the seller is your lender, has been a favorite strategy here in Alberta. Not as popular in places where real estate and the economy are popping along better, like, you know, British Columbia and Ontario, particularly in the major cities. Those markets have been good, and agreements for sale don't work as well in those areas. But in Alberta, the agreement for sale strategy has been working very well, and I expect now that COVID is upon us, it is going to bring even more opportunities. I think.
So let me ask you this, Barry, and sorry for jumping in, but
I'll go ahead.
Okay, so agreement for sale. So we're in the midst of COVID. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but best guess is I mean, there's just no way in my brain can get around there not being some sort of huge fallout from this. Just trying to get the economy back on track, plus the fact that the money that the government is paying for everything with, they're printing it as fast as they're doling it out. So it's not like they had a little piggy bank of however many gazillions of dollars waiting for a rainy day COVID disaster to happen. No, they're paying all of this out with money that they're printing as fast as it's going out is the issue. So not that I'm an economist or anything like that, but this is the only thing backing up the Canadian dollar is our and the world's confidence in Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government. That's really what backs a fiat currency, right? Is the confidence in the government. And I don't know how much confidence we have in our own government, or how much confidence the rest of the world has in the government. So if it's not an economic recession, it might be an economic uh, situation of hyperinflation, or at least heavy duty inflation. I don't know. But bottom line, the one thing, and again, thank you so much for being on that COVID crisis panel that we had a couple of weeks ago now. The one thing that came up with almost everybody on that panel was there are going to be massive opportunities coming along, because so many everyday people are going to get steamrolled by this and need a way out of their over leveraged houses or what have you. So agreements for sale, Barry, this is a very long winded way to get asking what I was going to ask you, but agreements for sale, just for those folks that might not be in Alberta or haven't taken your course before, give us a big picture definition of what that is and what it might be called elsewhere. So that's what they're called in Alberta. Do they have different names in different provinces?
Let's start with that one first. The one name that I've come across in other provinces is deferred purchase. Sometimes an agreement for sale is called a deferred purchase or deferred purchase agreement. So with that one little add-on, then let's talk big picture about what an agreement for sale / deferred purchase is. So an agreement for sale is, in its broadest sense, seller financing. If a seller has a property to sell, and for any number of reasons, the person buying cannot get a mortgage and the seller is prepared to be their bank, then the buyer and seller get together, the seller agrees to be the bank for a certain amount of the sale price, and then they agree that the seller will be the bank for, just like a mortgage, for a term, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. There might be a renewal. The seller might agree that say it's a 1 year term, which is pretty short. Seller might say, okay, well, at the end of 1 year, I'll agree to renew for another 3 or 4 or 5 years. And when the agreement for sale matures, when any renewals are done, it is time for the buyer now to pay the seller. Seller's the bank, banks have to be paid. And sooner or later, the buyer has to pay back the seller, who is his bank, at which time the buyer hopefully can go to his own bank and get a mortgage in order to take the seller out. So agreements for sale can be done where the seller has a clear title property. A clear title property. Seller might not owe one bean on his property, but when he finds out that when he gets his $400,000 sale price, he can get 1% in his bank, but his buyer would pay him 3%. He's prepared to, if he trusts the buyer, he's prepared to say, you know what, give me a little bit of money down and I'll be your bank for the balance of the 400,000. I'll carry it for a couple of years and then you have to pay me back. So that's a seller who has absolutely no mortgaging against this property. Right at the other end of the spectrum, we find a lot of deals, especially in Alberta or flat to negative economies, where a seller wants to sell and the house is worth the value of his mortgage. I'm doing one right now, just working on emails with one of my clients where his purchase price is exactly the amount of the underlying mortgage. So he's not putting down any amount of money. The seller is lending him an amount exactly equal to the underlying mortgage. The buyer is not taking over that underlying mortgage. That's what folks always think when there's an underlying mortgage, but the seller is lending him an amount equal to that underlying mortgage on exactly the same terms as that underlying mortgage. Our buyer will make a payment that's equal to the current mortgage payment. He'll give that to the seller. The seller will take it across and take that money and use it to pay his own existing mortgage. And in this particular case, the initial term is the term of the underlying mortgage, which goes to, I think, March of 2021. and my buyer has negotiated a renewal clause so that in March of 2021, if he's not ready to pay out at that time, the seller has agreed to renew that agreement for sale for another 5 years.
Wow.
So overall, it's seller financing
Mhm.
and sometimes called a deferred purchase agreement.
So Barry, in that case that you were just describing, every month the mortgage is going down slightly. Part of the principal is getting paid off. So the final price that the buyer is going to be paying is the mortgage amount due upon purchase. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. So what happens in one of these circumstances where the agreement for sale loan is exactly the same as the mortgage loan? So we have our mortgage loan that starts here and our agreement for sale loan that starts here. They each have the same payment being made. So as the buyer makes the AFS payment, down goes the AFS loan. And as the seller then gets that money and makes his mortgage payment, down goes the mortgage. And each month they go down at the exact same amount. So that by the time the term comes and when the buyer pays out his AFS amount, it goes over to the seller who only has to pay out the decreased mortgage amount, which is a long way of saying the buyer gets the benefit of mortgage pay down.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know is what's happening.
Right. No, that makes sense. So you touched on this, but what circumstances do you see where sellers are really open to this whole idea? Because we obviously see what's in it for the buyer. Doesn't need to qualify for financing, doesn't have to jump through any hoops. You know, he's getting control of the property, he can do whatever he's going to be doing with it in the meantime. Why would a seller want to do this?
Well, there's a number of circumstances. So we did touch on one, which is if the seller likes the buyer and thinks he's a good credit risk, he can make some money. He's ready to sell. He doesn't need his dough to get terrible interest rate in the bank, so he can earn a much better rate of interest if he's the bank for the buyer. So that's one way, one reason to do it. A second reason to do it is that sellers sometimes, especially when they bought at a higher price and when they might have some equity in the property, not all of these deals are circumstances where the seller has absolutely no equity left. He might have some equity and he just, for his own reasons, cannot countenance selling for less. He just really does not want to sell for less than what he paid. And sometimes a seller is prepared to go into an agreement for sale to get his price, which he would not get if he was selling in the open market, because prices have fallen and he would have to pay some real estate commission and he might have to pay payout penalties. And a seller sees that as a chance to preserve what little equity he has in the property. And so, you know, that's often a reason for sellers to do it. And, you know, one other sort of sidebar reason to use agreements for sale is that sometimes when our clients or our students talk to sellers about agreements for sale, and a seller may not want to actually do the agreement for sale, I've had a number of my students do joint ventures with sellers. Seller keeps the property, but he's moving, he doesn't want to be a manager, he's gone to another place, and they do a joint venture. But the AFS is the lead-in to seeing how a different strategy works.
Makes sense. Okay, so yeah, there are lots of different situations. I've definitely seen it where the case is where the market's gone down, the seller owes as much, if not more, than what current market value is on the house. So they would actually go negative trying to sell it normally. They definitely go negative listing it with a realtor because somebody has to pay the realtor. So this is a way for them to, you know, not really make any money, but just avoid losing money big time on a deal.
You know, David, it goes even farther than that. In some of these circumstances where the seller has determined that they can't sell because paying a payout penalty and paying a realtor would cause them to write a check for X number of dollars. Sometimes the value of the property is less than the value of the mortgage. I've had a number of those where the property is worth $20, $30, $40,000 less than the value of the mortgage. And sellers have actually written a check in those circumstances just to get the buyer to the point where he can be buying for the value of the mortgage, which is really what he wants to do. So that happens in, in tough in regions where the economy is tough.
Well, that was what happened in the States in 2008, 2009, 2010. They were called short sales over there, as far as I recall, where the the value of the property was a hell of a lot less than the mortgage. And in that case, the banks were, you could actually buy them directly from the banks because so many people got foreclosed on. Yeah. You can buy them for less than what the bank owed on them. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So that's agreements for sale, which if you're outside of Alberta, they might be called something different, deferred purchase agreement. But it just makes so much sense, you guys, right? I mean, because think about it, especially if the real estate market in your area goes flat or goes down, chances are, and the economy's shaky and people haven't got their, $2,000 a month is great, but it doesn't cover the nut for most people, getting the bailout package. So there are going to be people needing to downsize their properties. And if you've got some tools and some knowledge in there, this is a perfect opportunity to kind of go in there and make some creative type offers. Barry, what other opportunities? So we got agreements for sale. What other creative opportunities do you see coming down the pipeline if some of the other areas in Canada are hit with a negative real estate market?
The deferred purchase AFS does work best in most circumstances in a flat to negative market. But if we move over to something like rent to own, for example, I know that's a favorite strategy of yours, Dave. I think traditional rent to own works better in a market where property is increasing in value. Mm-hmm. It's much easier, I think, to do RTOs in a positive market than in a negative market, because quite a bit of it relies on the value of property in, say, 3 years. If I sell a property to Dave today by way of a rent to own, and Dave has to actually get a mortgage and pay me out in 3 years, if we're in a region where prices are going up 3 or 4% per year or more in certain places, it's much easier at the end of 3 years to come up with financing and to pay the price that I would like to get for having sold my house to Dave. So, I think rent to own is probably a good strategy in many areas of the country right now. And when I say a good strategy in many areas of the country, all of those comments have to be tempered with what the heck is happening in the real estate market with COVID. And I don't know the answer to that. I believe activity has slowed down. Here in Alberta, realtors can still do open houses, so they're sort of considered an essential service. But in terms of whether markets are good or bad right now, I know Alberta's we're pretty shaky in Alberta because of COVID and the price of oil, but I don't know what's going on because of COVID in other areas. I just know that when the market is better, rent to own is an easier strategy to put in place. But even in a down market, rent to own can be an exit strategy for folks who have properties that they don't like, that aren't quite working for them. If you buy a property by way of agreement for sale, for instance, and you're going, okay, well, what am I going to do with this? Do I want to rent it out for my own portfolio? I mean, you can find a buyer by way of rent to own and sell them that property by way of rent to own, where the rent to own term matches up with the term of the agreement for sale. So that's a melding up of a couple of different strategies. But I'm going to throw that back at you, Dave. You and I have done enough rent to own chit chats. I'd like to hear what you think about rent to own in today's market.
Well, I think you have to, I think if you did it the way you're talking about, so if you got a property under agreement for sale and then you do something creative to your end buyer, via rent to own. That could work very, very nicely. Another way of doing that would be sandwich leases, kind of a fancy way of, or just different way of doing the same thing. So basically you find a motivated seller, ideally with a vacant property, and you lease the property from them with the right to purchase it for a fixed price at the end of a fixed amount of time. And then you turn around and you sublet that same property to a tenant buyer with the different deal there. That can work. The challenge is, and Barry, when I was rocking and rolling with rent to own, I was doing client first rent to own deals where we would find a tenant buyer, then go buy them a house and rent to own it to them for 2, 3, 4 years until they could qualify to purchase it. That is very risky at the best of times. and when things are flat or going negative in a real estate market, it's very, very, very risky. So it's not something I would recommend people do at this time. However, if you can minimize your exposure by doing a sandwich lease type deal or doing an agreement for sale where you've got some sort of a, an escape clause in there should things go awry, then I think it could make a lot of sense.
Okay. The one thing that we talk about, at least I talk about when we're doing the client first or tenant first style, especially, is one of the huge success factors is if you can get a really good chunk of initial option money. So people have to buy an option from you. That's their right to buy. But to buy that from you, that's a non-refundable amount of money. And the bigger that initial chunk of option money, the more chance that this particular buyer will actually go through and close the deal and pay you out.
That's definitely true, Barry. The challenge is, and this bit me in the ass personally several times, unfortunately, is even if you get a fairly big chunk of change, it's usually not the equivalent of the down payment that you had to come up with to buy the property in the first place, right? Because me going in as a real estate investor, in order to purchase the house, I need to come up with 20% down, plus here in BC, property transfer taxes, closing costs, etc. If my tenant buyer could come up with 20% down, they really wouldn't, in most cases, need my services, right? So they're coming up with 5% down. We're trying to get them built up to where they have 10% into the deal so that they can qualify for financing at the end of a couple of years. And that's all great. I mean, because even 5% of a $400,000 property is a fairly significant amount of money. However, their 20 grand doesn't compare to my 85, 90 grand that I've had to put up or my investors have had to put up. And bottom line, if that same property, if it's worth $400,000 today, but then at the end of 2 or 3 years, it's, and our agreement is, okay, you're going to buy it from me 2 or 3 years down the road for $440,000 or $450,000, whatever we've agreed upon as a reasonable appreciation rate. But that doesn't come to fruition. At the end of 3 years, it's still worth 400 grand, or worse yet, now it's worth 385,000, or that's the most the bank says it's worth. Then you're kind of screwed, and then your tenant buyer, that's where you have to go start getting creative. In some cases, they're ready to walk because the house is worth significantly less than what they were thinking it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, it gets messy fast.
It does, and your numbers are, I think that's well described. And I think what we're all realizing here is that, it's not that we didn't realize this. Property values do not always go up. What is a booming market doesn't always stay a booming market, and these aberrational cyclical lows that we get into, yeah, they'll chew up that $20,000 deposit, and if your $400,000 house is worth $385,000 3 years after the fact, that's a toughie. So anytime you're doing rent to own, I mean, that's why a really big chunk of option money is good, but not many people have it. I'm doing one right now where the folks have put up 50,000 on a $380,000 deal. So that's still pretty good, but it isn't the 20%.
Right, right.
Uh,
But I feel a lot more confident with that than 10 grand. That's
yeah, yeah. So yeah, in tougher times when property isn't appreciating, it's difficult to do. And anybody who thinks property values will always go up, well, that's just not so.
We've seen it happen. Exactly, Barry. We've seen, and that's the challenge. We don't know what's going to be happening after this whole COVID thing. We don't know which provinces it's going to hit more. We don't know, because like they say, like it's been go, go, go time in Ontario, specifically in the GTA. It's been a go, 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 go for many years. Yes. Vancouver, it's been go, 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 go for many years. So everybody looks like a freaking genius that's bought any property there because they haven't had to go through a downturn in recent memory. So, and who knows, they may or may not have to go through one now. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball. Just the sheer numbers of immigrants that come into the country and stay in those areas is massive. I don't know if that helps keep things afloat, if that just creates the never-ending demand for property. I don't have the answer to that, but it'll be interesting to see what happens.
But one other thing on rent to own is that I've had a few of my clients and students as they were trying to sell one of their own already owned properties. So this is now property first instead of tenant first. They already own a property. For whatever reason they want to exit. They're looking to get somebody who's got a nice big down payment or big initial option money. They can't find that person. Now they're looking for someone who has a much smaller amount, and that's even hard to find. They're saying, okay, well, let's open it up so that basically somebody doesn't have to put up really any money at the beginning, but we will vet them really hard to make sure they are good credit risks. So when they turn to that approach, they of course got a lot more candidates, way more candidates looking to buy a rent-to-own property for no money down. And they've done a deal or two. Lots more people to look at, lots more diligence that you have to do. And they've also set them out on longer terms. So I think I recall one of my clients said he did a 10-year. 10-year rent to own, basically no money down, but fabulous credit, just cannot accumulate down payment money.
So he's giving them 10 years to build up their down payment over time. So several big benefits to that, Barry. And I think, that's a huge opportunity. If you've got a stinker in your portfolio and you want to, you've got one of those properties that's not cash flowing and you want to turn it into something that does cash flow. If you got something that's a bit of a maintenance headache that you'd like to take that hopefully off your plate, then doing that property first strategy just makes all sorts of sense because you can be charging over market rent. So if your normal rent was, let's say, $1,200 for that property, you could probably quite easily charge $1,600 and create some cash flow that way because the excess money that you're charging on top of the $1,200 is applying towards their down payment when they purchase the property. So again, that's building up their down payment, their rental credits, as it were, over time, especially over 10 years, then that becomes massive. It usually the deal with most rent owns as well is that your tenant buyer is responsible for the property. So if the toilet plugs up, the infamous 2 a.m. plug toilet call, it's them who's supposed to be dealing with that. They're the ones that are supposed to be maintaining the property as well. So very, very good strategy if you've got some properties that aren't performing nicely and you want to turn them around. And I would, in that situation, be very, very open to even getting into some no money down type rent owns if it's with the right person.
Got to be the right person for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got agreements for sale. We've got potentially rent to own type situations, lease options. So again, I don't know, Barry, would you agree, in these kind of shaky times, it makes, when it comes to rent own, probably makes more sense if you're doing it with your own property and your own portfolio. So property first, or if you're getting into the property creatively, either through an agreement for sale or a sandwich lease situation with the owner. Would you agree those probably makes more sense
I mean,
nowadays?
I think those are probably the safest way to do it. If you're going to do client slash tenant first, for the reasons we just talked about, boy, you'd sure want a big chunk of initial option money. And if you're working with an investor, you got to sit them down and look them in the eye and go, okay, let's just review what's happened with the economy and with various real estate markets. Do we all understand here that property can decrease in value? Look me in the eye and say to me, yes, Dave, I understand property can decrease in value. And if that happens in our deal in 3 years,
Better yet, make sure, look them in the eye, make sure they sign off on it too. That's
yes, sign off on it for sure.
Here's a really, I remember hearing about this gentleman years ago, a fellow on Vancouver Island, very astute real estate investor. I think he's a Rain guy too. Gary Spencer Smith. Do you know Gary, Barry?
I know the name, but I don't really know him.
Anyhow, brilliant, very conservative rent-own guy. I can't remember the little town he's based in, but bottom line is this town was flat for years. Like there was nothing going on with the real estate market in his small city. And he was doing a variation of client, well, no, you know what? It wasn't client first. It was property first, rent-own deals. But here's what he did. Very smart. He only focused on properties that would cash flow as a regular rental, because that was my big mistake with client first. And a lot of people's big mistake with client first is we go out and we buy the client the house that they want, which is nice, but typically that's not necessarily a good rental property, right? It wouldn't cash flow on its own 2 feet. What Gary did that was so smart was he would go out and find a property that made sense as a rental. So typically a property with a basement suite in it already, all right? So even if he bought that as a normal rental, it would still cash flow. He would then turn around and sell it as a rent to own and use the rental from the suite to help his tenant buyer eventually get qualified to purchase that property from him 2 or 3 years down the road. But he managed it, right? But he could show the bank, hey, here's what this property looks like. Here's the revenue that it's generating, and here's why it makes sense to sell it to my client for this price. And then the other thing he was super smart about was, even though he was in kind of a flat market, even in flat markets, certain neighborhoods tend to be upwardly mobile. Certain neighborhoods, even in a crappy real estate market, can be going up. So he would only buy properties in those neighborhoods that met his criteria. So very, very smart way of going about it in a not so great market.
Well, that's, I mean, that's probably good advice today for any folks who want to do rent to own. If you can find one of those properties that will, you know, be positive cash flow because of a suite, I mean, that's the one to buy. Let that money accumulate for your tenant buyer and set them up for success. And the other part of that, Dave, is it follows along with what I say, especially to my first time buyers who are, you know, maybe they're just buying a buy and hold as their very first toe dip into the real estate investing waters. I mean, I like to say to them that if you buy a really solid property in a really solid area and manage the heck out of it, you're going to be fine in good times and bad, because even when the vacancy rate is 20%, you're going to be in the 80%. So that's what Gary was doing, buying in those upwardly mobile sections where prices never go down as much and you have much better chance. So that's brilliant on his part.
You know what? And I agree. However, bottom line is, then I think about, okay, you got all that work of finding that kind of a property and it's cash flow positive. Why the hell would you ever want to sell it? Right? I mean, if you're buying it for somebody, why not just keep it as a rental and benefit from all the amazing long-term profit centers of real estate.
Well, I mean, it's because it's a short-term strategy, and you're looking at it for the benefits that you get out of a short-term strategy instead of turning it into long-term. But I bet Gary found a few of those properties where he went, you know what, this one's too good,
Yeah,
and I'm sure he kept a few in his own portfolio.
I think so. I think so. And Julie Broad as well, another Vancouver Island real estate entrepreneur, did something very similar in Nanaimo for many years. So yeah, it's a good strategy, guys. Yeah.
But if we turn over to some of the other ones, Dave, I was just thinking as we were talking there, the other couple of things we talk about are fix and flips and assignments and joint ventures.
Yeah.
You know, on the fix and flip side of things, I think what our advice to people has been is that you have to be so careful to buy well. You cannot buy a property for $20,000 less than what the after repaired value is and think that everything's going to go well and you're going to spend 10 on paint and carpet and get your 10 out of it. I mean, in these tougher times where you don't know what's happening next week, I mean, I think you have to, if you're doing fix and flip and you have a margin of safety that you like for how you do your fix and flips, I would be counseling people to increase that margin of safety as we just don't know what the next few months are going to bring. So if you're looking to acquire a property today and fix it and flip it, say in 3 or 4 months, I mean, I'm very nervous about what's going to go on in 3 or 4 months, and what will protect you in that fix and flip, as it always does in any fix and flip, is to have enough of a margin between what you're buying at and what you think you're going to do down the road. That's what protects you, and that's even a better way to look at it today.
Well, I think proof of the pudding with that, Barry, is on the call we did a few weeks ago with our 4,000 plus registrations for it. Even Stefan Arnio, who's Canada's flip expert kind of guy, was saying, hey, in these times, it's focus on cash flow, right? It's focus on the properties that have the cash flow. You don't know what the hell's going to happen to your market. Not a good time to get into fix and flips unless you can get the property for such a ridiculously low price that you're covered anyway. You're covered if you fix it and you flip it, you make some money. If you can't flip it, you turn it into a rental and it still cash flows. That's what you got to be looking at for sure.
Absolutely. You just have to, because you know those margins always get compressed no matter how good we are, no matter how many we've done, and no matter how hard we assess it, they get compressed anyway. And in this tougher market, you need that. It's actually quite unbelievable what kind of a margin you need in fix and flip. And the most successful fix and flippers really won't buy a property unless they have the margin. So,
oh yeah, even at the best of times, the margin, like you have to get such of a steal of a deal to be safe. It's crazy.
Well, you know, we were involved with one a short while ago where we did a joint venture, and our joint venture partners told us that when they first looked at the house, they did their kind of first inspection. They went in, really they could have used those N95 masks as they went into the house. And then when they got out, they drove away a block and they stopped their car and they got out of their car and they went onto the grass boulevard and they wiped their shoes because that's the state of the house. But because that was the state of the house, they got to buy it at such an amazingly low price that it worked out for them. So big margins, folks. If you're doing fix and flip, be very careful in today's market.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. So talk to us a little bit about your take on joint ventures these days.
Can I talk a wee bit about assignments maybe and finish?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that because joint ventures kind of ties this all together.
Yeah.
So assignments, as most folks watching know, are a situation where you as the investor get a property under contract. You actually write a real estate purchase contract, you get it under contract and undervalue. I mean, you're looking for an undervalued property. For whatever reason is, you locate an undervalued property, and for many investors, it's because their marketing funnels bring them in all kinds of opportunities. And every once in a while, there's one that's undervalued that doesn't fit their own strategy that they don't want to acquire. So they They get it under contract, and then they look for somebody who will take it off their hands at a higher price, at the market value. And they then move their contract over to the ultimate buyer, and they collect $5,000 or $10,000 on the way by. And that's, that's how assignments work.
So like, some people know it as wholesaling.
Otherwise known as wholesaling, yes. It's probably a better word, wholesaling, than assignments. Wholesaling is the strategy, and an assignment is what you do with the property technically and legally to move it along to somebody else. But so if you're looking for undervalued properties, I think it's kind of like fix and flip. You want to be sure that, number one, to put your time and effort into trying to make it work. I mean, make sure at the beginning that you actually have located an undervalued property. And the second thing is you make sure that you are not going unconditional on the deal before you've got someone to take you out and pay you some money. I know that seems probably like nobody would ever go unconditional on a property they don't intend to buy unless they had a rock solid buyer to buy it from them. But that does happen every once in a while. So assignments, wholesaling can still be a valuable strategy really in any market. In any market where you are able to come across undervalued properties and where you have the ability to find people to buy that property from you, wholesaling / assignments continues to be a good strategy even in today's tougher market in Alberta and the Canadian COVID market generally. So I think we're just urging more caution, Dave, for anybody who applies any of these strategies, just to be a little more cautious than they would normally be, which maybe takes us into joint ventures.
Well, actually, if you don't mind, Barry, I might throw one more little curve in there. So just a little background, you guys. Way back in 2003, when I first came back to Canada after living overseas for almost 15 years, that's all I did for 2 years was creative real estate deals in and around Kamloops, British Columbia. And Barry, I sure as hell wish I'd have known you better back then. But one of the things that I did with pretty good success a few times, which I thought might even be better than wholesaling, was just options. Because an option took all of the risk off of me. Yeah. And the way I did options, I even did non-exclusive options. So if you're a realtor on the call, you're going to hate my guts for explaining this, but bottom line, it's a way to get into a property. You get an option to purchase the property at a price that both you and the seller agree upon. That's where, Barry talking about, you need to make sure that there's a good margin in there. And then you go out and you try and find somebody who'll pay you something higher than what your option price is for the property, and you keep whatever the difference is. So I can remember the best option deal I ever did was with a lady who had an executive home in Blind Bay on the Shuswap here in British Columbia. And she was a faraway owner. She and her husband had built this property from scratch. It was their dream home. It was all that kind of stuff. As soon as it got built, the poor guy got cancer and died. I mean, it was tragic. So she moved back home to where her family was, and they had this big, beautiful house sitting there, but it was unique in the sense that the carpet was like powder blue, and the paint job inside was like, I don't know what the color green was, but it was a weird kind of layout, weird house, because it was their ideal home, right? So the poor lady was paying for maintenance on this executive home. It had been unoccupied for like 2 or 3 years. She'd gone through 3 or 4 realtors trying to sell this sucker. It wasn't everybody's cup of tea. And I went in, and bottom line, said, hey, I'll option the price of the property from you, non-exclusive. You can still list it with a realtor, because I knew no realtor was going to be able to sell this sucker anytime soon. You're still in charge. You're still responsible for all of the payments and all of the maintenance, everything on this property. I'm not paying you. I'm paying you $1 to make this legal. That's all I paid her. And whatever I get above our option price is my profit. And it was just perfectly explained up front. And I actually ended up by creatively marketing the property, found some some folks from Calgary, oil people, who the wife had this exact same taste as this lady, loved the powder blue carpet, loved everything about this place. And that was a nice little $35,000, $40,000 profit on that property from doing an option. But the beautiful thing about that is zero risk for me. The only thing was I had to advertise it, and didn't have to worry about if I closed, great. If I didn't close, whatever, the option expired.
Yeah, that I've taught options in some of my focus workshops, Dave, and I personally love the notion of the option because, like the assignment, the option gives you control of the property. I mean, with the wholesaling, with the assignment, you write a purchase contract to get control. With the option, you write an option, which gives you the right but not the obligation to buy. It's less paperwork. If you never do anything with it, you have no obligation. So I like the notion of options, and sometimes I think that options would be better. And somehow the notion of options just doesn't seem to get traction. But I'm not giving up. Now that I hear that you used to do that, I think maybe we should do a course on options, you and I. That would be, because
it's been a little while for me, but yeah, it's
I mean, if you go along to that lady, you don't want to be, you certainly don't want to be putting yourself in a position where a realtor, apologize to all the realtors in the crowd, but you don't want to be putting yourself in a position where a realtor says, Dave, you're acting just like a realtor. I'm turning.
And I did. I acted just like a realtor. And here's how I got around it, Barry.
Yeah.
I had an equitable interest in that property.
Yes.
Right? Because my option, I paid the lady $1. Today, I'd probably bump it up to $10. But it was a nominal fee, but it was a financial interest in the property. And that option was registered on title here in British Columbia, in Land Titles Office. It was a registered agreement on title. That's how I covered my ass. And none of the realtors can call foul because I had an equitable interest in that property. Now, did they like it? Of course not. They hated it. But what do I care, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's
yeah. No, that's that's a great way to protect yourself, and I think that works in other provinces. You could do that in Alberta. You could register your option on the title. So there's ways to protect yourself. And so, folks, if you think you find a property that's undervalued, you might be able to do something with. Both assignments and options are ways to get control of the property and then perhaps move it along and make some money. So that's good.
Excellent. All right, Barry. So we're kind of getting towards the end of the hour here. Do you want to talk about joint ventures, and then are you open to us opening things up for Q&A?
Sure. Let's do joint ventures and then Q&A. So joint ventures, really, the notion of a joint venture, which again, I'm pretty sure everybody understands it, but it's just a circumstance where one person has money typically, and one person has time and expertise. And the person who has time and expertise might have had money at one point, but most folks who get into the real estate game actually run out of money somewhere along the line. They run out of cash, they run out of ability to qualify for financing, and they need to hook up with someone who has money and likely no experience. But that money person also wants to get into the real estate game. So the notion of a joint venture applies to agreements for sale. Agreements for sale are not always no money down deals. You often have to you have to give the seller some money. If you have no money of your own, you can involve your joint venture partner and say, listen, I need 20 grand to acquire this property. Give them all the details. They're your money partner for the 20,000 you need for this particular agreement for sale. If you're doing rent to own, and you're not selling your own property, you're doing tenant first. Well, unless you can buy the property for your tenant buyer yourself, then you need a joint venture partner who can qualify for the mortgage and who has the down payment. So you need it in that circumstance. In fix and flip, again, if you have all the fix and flip expertise in the world, both as to the the fixing and the finding, and maybe including the flipping, you still have to buy the property. You still have to come up with the money to do the fix-ups and repair the place. And if you don't have that money yourself, joint ventures apply nicely to fix and flips. Not as much on the assignment side or the option side, unless when you get a property under contract with wholesaling assignment or with an option. If you decide that that's a property that you want to acquire yourself, if it's not one you're turning out to some other third party, if you want to acquire it yourself because you think it'll work for you, then you may need a joint venture partner to help you out with any of those strategies. There's a couple of other things about joint ventures, and I think my observation over the years, and I think yours too, Dave, is that there are actually a lot more people with money who want to get into real estate but don't have the expertise or the time or the interest in learning how these strategies work. But if they can be presented with a documented, lots of diligence, lots of backup kind of opportunity that they can go, okay, I get it. You know what you're doing in real estate. I don't. I see the returns. I can write checks. There's lots more people who can write checks than there are people who want to do the work. And I know that's hard for people in the trenches to believe, but I believe that is true. And then the second part of joint ventures is that you have to find those people. So networking events, you have to build your own database. You have to reach out to people. It's great if you can actually do one deal, one successful deal, and document the heck out of it so that when you're going along to your database, you can go, you know, I did this deal and we had these results. Here's my newest setup. Who wants in? And it doesn't take very long before you can get great financial responses to any of your requests for joint venture partners, just because you've done some deals, you've done them well, people can see, and then people will write you checks. So that's my take on joint ventures when it applies to creative real estate.
Oh, most definitely, Barry. I think now is actually the perfect time to be finding your joint venture partners and shaking the tree and starting to raise capital, because here's the thing. Chances are, A, you've got some time to focus on it, right? We're all kind of locked up. And B, this is the best time in modern human history to get somebody else's attention. I mean, up until now, everybody was so doing their own thing out there, distracted. Is the hardest thing to find wasn't the money, it was to find people's attention to actually take a look at what the heck it is that you're talking about. So now it's the perfect time to start doing some of the things Barry was talking about. My process that I talk about is, A, find a target group of prospective investors that you want to focus on. Break the ice with them first before you start talking business. Don't make the dumb mistakes I made early on, where it's just like a bull in a china shop trying to, hey, I got a great deal, give me money. Doesn't work that nicely. So you do it with a lot more class and tact than that, for sure. But now is the time to be educating people, because again, one of the challenges, so it's kind of a double-edged sword right now, Barry, because everybody's worried about the stock market. Lots of people are worried about the real estate market. The only thing we see on the news is negativity about the economy and the Great Recession, Great Depression we're going to go into. So many people lost so many billions of dollars with the stock market recently that they're freaked out. So I think a lot of people have just kind of got this, whatever money they've got, they're just kind of holding on to it to wait to see what happens. But I think now's the perfect time for us to be able to go out and say, hey, you know what? Acknowledge where they're at. I get that you're worried and you're freaked out about where to put your money. Here's why real estate makes sense, right? Here's why a good, well-chosen, well-picked out real estate investment with somebody who knows what the hell they're doing makes so much more sense than putting your money in the stock market right now. So here's profit center 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, perhaps 8, depending on how you count them, in real estate versus 1 or 2 with stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Go ahead, jump in, Barry.
I mean, I do agree. I mean, I think that just because we're in the particular time that we're in is no time to stop doing what you're doing. I think you have to be on it a little more. You have to recognize people's fears. You have to make sure that you have a solid proposition. Nobody will like your iffy proposition, your proposition that isn't well supported, your proposition that looks like it has holes in it. So people will still write checks, especially in tougher times, when they can look and have confidence that what you're proposing has a great chance of success and making them money.
Exactly. All right, my friend. Awesome stuff. We're going to open up things for Q&A now, you guys. Feel free to type in your questions in the question box. I just think that might work better than trying to open up audio for everybody. We've got so many people on the call live. So we got a question here from Loverly. She says, how would you protect yourself as the working partner in a joint venture deal? And I'm ad-libbing a little bit here, but I think that's what you mean. How would you protect yourself as a working partner in a joint venture deal with unforeseen situations like COVID, like life events, like personality clashes with the joint venture partners? How do you protect yourself? How do you protect your joint venture partner?
Ooh, good question. And I think that's a tough one to answer. As soon as COVID hit, everybody was talking about whether agreements of all different kinds had what they called force majeure clauses in them or frustration clauses in them. So, force majeure is a clause in a contract that says, if we have COVID or an earthquake or some giant hurricane rips up this property, then all bets are off, and it gives you some rights to do certain things. So overall, though, I think it is difficult to protect yourself in agreements for those unforeseen circumstances. I mean, most joint venture agreements, for instance. So one thing you should do for sure is have a joint venture agreement. The next thing is, though, to look at some of those things that you could have in a joint venture agreement and decide whether or not you want to put them in. And some of them are difficult to put in. So you can talk about one party gets to call for a sale if the value of the property goes up by 25%, or one party gets to diminish another party's interest or take over another party's interest if they're not paying their share of the money that the joint venture says each party has to pay. It's harder to put in clauses that deal with things like, I know we loved each other when we started, but now that we're doing this, I actually hate your guts. And so because that could come up, I'm not saying it's going to come up, but just in case it does turn out that I hate your guts, then I get to exit the joint venture in this way. Those are tough because they're like prenuptial agreements. They're dealing with potential failure in the face of positive and wonderful. And so, Loverly, that is a good question, but for the circumstances we're talking about, I think those are hard to put in a joint venture agreement.
Yeah, but I think, so my big takeaway, Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, have a really good joint venture agreement in place, first of all. So for example, a deal we did years ago with 5 joint venture partners, the joint venture agreement ended up costing us $18,000 in legal fees to put together. Now, mind you, this was for a rather large property, so it was pittance comparatively, but it covered so many of those things. Plus, the reason it cost so much is we had 5 different lawyers looking at it, and to get all the parties to agree on it and to say it's fine, it took a bit. But at the end of the day, we had a joint venture agreement that everybody was happy with, that served us in good stead. But that's really the thing. So the other thing I think is really important, Barry, is just clear communication and understanding up front that, hey, you know what, we're doing this joint venture agreement. You're the money partner. You're the passive partner in this deal. I am the active partner in this deal. I am the one that's going to be doing the work. I'm the one that's going to be making the day-to-day decisions. If something really big happens, then yeah, we'll consult, and I'll give everybody my 2 cents worth, and then we'll agree together. But for the normal stuff, it's just, me making those kind of decisions, and then making sure that you're up to speed with the reporting on a regular basis. Do what you told them you were going to do in the first place. That's where things get screwed up, is when you screw it up and you make promises that you don't deliver on, right? So if you say you're going to report to them every quarter, report to them every quarter, right? If you say you're going to do this, do it, and then have a really good, solid agreement. And the other thing I would suggest, Barry, is that the agreement, for example, unforeseen cash calls, right? So don't make that lopsided. So if there's a cash call for something, make sure that you are on the hook as well as your joint venture partner. So it's not them always having to come up with the cash, that you have some skin in the game should things go awry as well. What do you think about that, Barry?
I agree with that. I mean, that the notion of who has to come up with extra cash, I think, is most often solved by both parties agreeing to come up with equal amounts, even if the money partner put in all the money at the beginning. Now we're into the middle of the joint venture and money's required. Most agreements, a lot of agreements say we'll contribute 50-50 to that. I've seen the odd one, though, where the money partner goes, listen, I'm out. I did everything at the beginning. I put up the down payment. I qualified for the mortgage. And from now on there, Mr. Working Partner, it's all on you. So that's a tough-nosed, hard-nosed money partner who imposes that. But I have seen it every once in a while. It's kind of the other way around, from the working partner still making the money partner come up with all the cash.
Exactly. All right, we got some good questions coming here. So Christian says, I've only done AFS privately, so agreements for sale privately. If you do an agreement for sale through a realtor listed property, what's the typical arrangement for paying the realtor?
Well, actually, I guess there isn't really a typical way of doing it, because realtors do so few AFS deals that I just haven't seen very many. But I have seen two varieties of this. One is where there's enough cash being paid to the seller that there's enough to pay the commission. Mm-hmm. And commission gets paid in the normal way on the completion date, which is really the day the buyer gets the keys. More often, I've seen the obligation to pay commission put off until the maturity of the AFS a few years down the road. And I think part of that comes from, and realtors have trouble with this, because I think their rules say that they get paid when the sale finalizes. And in the eyes of real estate boards, an AFS deal isn't finalized till the title changes hands somewhere down the road. So I've seen it both ways, more along the line where the commission is deferred until later.
All right, very good. And I could be wrong, but most realtors don't really get it, and they really don't like the idea of doing anything that's at all creative. That's been my experience. I could be wrong.
And I don't blame them. For a realtor to get up to speed on agreements for sale where they can, as a professional, say to themselves and to their clients, listen, I know what's going on with this deal, and don't worry, you're in good hands with me. I mean, most realtors don't have the expertise, so I don't blame them for not being too enthusiastic. And most AFS deals are wrinkly and crinkly anyway. If the seller could sell in the normal way with a realtor, that's what they'd be doing. Exactly. So it's hard on realtors, and I'm sympathetic to them.
So Neil says, regarding agreements for sale, have you ever had to work with an AFS seller who's agreed to renew financing, however, the bank wouldn't renew the mortgage?
I haven't had that circumstance, but that could occur. That could occur because, just as a basic lending principle, if you've got a 5-year mortgage with a bank and it comes to the end of the 5 years, they do not have to renew that mortgage. They have absolutely no obligation, just like a fixed term lease. Fixed term lease is done. You don't have any obligation to renew with your tenant, but banks have no obligation to renew. Now, mostly they renew, because if you've paid faithfully for 5 years and they're fine with giving you whatever the current interest rate is and you're fine paying, then why not? It's just easy peasy, sign the one pager and keep it going. But I think you have to take that into account in tougher financial times, because Rob Carrick in the Globe and Mail did a piece last week on what lenders can do, say, with a HELOC. HELOCs are kind of on-demand loans that, as banks get edgy about financial circumstances in certain areas, they can make you pay back your HELOC in certain circumstances. A plain Jane mortgage that's coming up for renewal, they go, working in Fort McMurray, Alberta, I don't really think we want to renew this mortgage. So although I haven't run into an AFS deal where a lender has said, I won't renew at renewal time, it could happen. That's all I got to say about that.
Anything could happen there for sure. So somebody's asking, would a sandwich lease be a good idea in Ontario at this time?
Well, I mean, if you can get a property under contract, if you can lease the property from the current owner for a rental that you think you can then turn around and sublease to someone else for higher rent, I mean, because that's what a sandwich lease is. If you can get it under contract with that current owner for a price that you think is an undervalued price, then yeah, sandwich leases can work in Ontario the same way as they can work anywhere else. It's really a matter of analyzing the local market and making sure you've got the spread between you leasing from the current owner and you lease optioning out to your ultimate buyer.
Very good. So Neil, you said you had 2 questions. That was one of them. If you want to type in your other one, that'd be great. And Loverly's got another question. Barry, what's your take on assignments on pre-construction condos?
Let me tell you a story. Got a call from a client the other day who got a property under contract, a pre-construction property under contract, told everybody in sight that they had no intention of closing on the deal, and their hope was to assign the property to somebody else and make some money doing it. The seller said, yeah, I understand that. And he didn't require them to prove they had financing so they could buy. They didn't try and get financing. And guess what? They got a little market blip in the area that they're in. And now they can't sell or assign the property for more money than they've agreed to pay. So they're in tight with a pretty big deposit. I think they put up maybe $40,000 as a deposit.
Non-refundable deposit too, right?
Non-refundable. Well, it's non-refundable in the sense that the deal is unconditional. So once you go unconditional, that makes it non-refundable. So trouble there. So should you do assignments on pre-construction properties? I mean, your risk is that you won't be able to sell it for more than what you're obligated to pay. And I just ran into that, and this was out in BC. So, how much risk are you prepared to take?
Basically, it's speculation is what that is. It's 100% speculation. You're betting on the property being worth more than what you're agreeing to pay for it. And if that doesn't happen, it can bite you in the derriere.
Yep, speculation.
All right. You guys, you know what? Is your lovely wife around, Barry?
He's still here.
Donna, come over and say hi, Donna, for a quick second. We're going to take some more questions, you guys. But in the meantime, if you want to get more in-depth training from Mr. Barry McGuire and his lovely wife, Donna. Donna, I've just put in the link into the chat. Oops, sorry. I just sent that to Loverly. I'll send this to everybody. Into the chat box, you guys. McGuire.ca/shop. So Donna, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys have for anybody who's interested in learning these creative strategies much more in depth.
Well, we have online courses. We've got the home study kits for all of the strategies that you guys have been talking about. There's audio, there's video, there's manuals, there's exercises. There's actually the documents, the actual contracts and precedents you need to do these kind of strategies.
Yeah, so there's one, the biggest one is the Rapid Cash program that has all of the strategies in them, which then leads off into smaller packages, less expensive packages where, say, you can just look at agreements for sale, or you can just look at rent to own. If that's what you're interested in, and you don't want the big RCP package. So yeah, I think there's 5 of them up there. They're all pretty slick. There's just a whole raft of material that people get. It's all digital, and of course we're around to answer questions and help out.
Awesome. And what's the special deal that you've got for everybody, Donna?
This week for Dave Dubois people, we're offering 40% off across the board.
Wow, that's
just this week though.
That's very generous of you. That's so. How do they get that?
When they go to purchase, they use the coupon code DUBEAU.
DUBEAU. There we go. Awesome. Well, so you guys, if you're interested, I mean, this is very, very rare. Okay, there's a ton of us real estate guys out there that have got courses and all this kind of stuff. There aren't a ton of real estate lawyers who are also real estate investors, who also teach and train on this stuff, who also have courses, who also include all of their legal documentation in with those courses that other people have already paid mega thousands of dollars for them to create. So that's a pretty good deal, if you ask me. Well, I don't even know how much your courses cost, but just they're a hell of a lot cheaper than sitting down across the table from me for a while there, Barry, I'm thinking.
Well, $500 an hour, it takes quite a while to teach somebody all about creative real estate. For sure. It's way, way less than hiring me to teach you.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for making that available, you guys. That's awesome. So again, you guys, if you're watching this as a replay, I'll put the links in below the video, however that works. And if you have any we're just going to keep going for a couple of minutes here. If you have any last minute questions, you guys, and if I haven't answered your question, please type it in again because it's scrolled way up to the top and I haven't seen it or something. So Andrea's asking, what kind of paperwork is required for an agreement for sale? Would it be similar to a joint venture agreement created by a lawyer, or a standard form similar to a purchase and sale agreement? So is it something you need to create uniquely, or can you go online and download it? Something. Thanks, Donna.
Well, there's 2 parts to it, Dave. The first part that we coach our students to get involved in and to learn about is just the straightforward real estate purchase contract, the agreement of purchase and sale. It's called different things in all the provinces, but your basic contract that you would use to buy a piece of property. So you need that, and then you need a 1-page agreement for sale financing schedule, because that's what really contains all of the nuts and bolts of the agreement for sale. So on the first part, the real estate purchase contract just has a term in it that says, this transaction will close by way of, quotes, agreement for sale, close quotes. This transaction will close by way of agreement for sale. So saying agreement for sale means that it's one of those deals where title remains in the seller's name. It describes the style of transaction. So that's all the students or anybody using the technique has to learn how to do, is put those words in the contract and then use the correct financing schedule. And for buyers, there's 2 different ones that we could go into great detail, but it's in the courses we just talked about. So then the second part of it is the agreement for sale document itself. And that is a document that looks kind of like a mortgage, because remember, in an agreement for sale, the seller is your bank. So there is a loan document called an agreement for sale document, and lawyers create that rather than students having to do it. The financing schedule says, depending on which side of the deal you're on, if you're a buyer, the buyer financing schedule says that the buyer's lawyer will create that document. And we say that because we want you to maintain and be in control of the documentation as much as possible.
Very good. All right, you guys. We've got Donna's email address in there if you've got any questions that we haven't been able to cover right now. I'm going to wrap things up just because I got another call coming up in about 9 minutes. And also, I just want to say, you know, Barry, it's always a pleasure to see you. I wish it were in person because Barry's usually really, really kind and brings me a cannabis jam, which is always awesome. But this is the next best thing, my friend. So thank you so much for sharing some of your time and your knowledge and your expertise with us here today in the midst of this COVID lockdown. Thank you to your lovely wife, Donna, for organizing everything and for the very, very generous discount, you guys. I didn't even ask these guys for that. I just said, hey, dude, it'd be nice if you did something nice for folks that are on the call. That's very, very nice. That's very generous. So if you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to learn more in depth, why not? This is the time. You've got the time to do it. I really believe that a lot of these creative type deals are going to make themselves, no, let me rephrase that. There's going to be the opportunity for you to do a ton of creative type deals if you understand how they work. The opportunity will be there. Whether you understand how to take advantage of that opportunity or not is completely up to you. So while you're in lockdown, why not put that time to good use? Learn from somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, not just knows what the hell they're doing, understands the legalities of, I mean, inside and out. I mean, this is as good as it gets, people. A real estate investor and a lawyer and a trainer. Trifecta of perfection when it comes to teaching people about real estate investing. So Barry, you know what? I got to pump your tires. You're too damn modest. So thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. And you guys, thank you for tuning in. It's been a lot of fun. I love these zooming in calls.
Dave, thank you very much for having me on. Folks, thanks for listening. These are a lot of fun. We'll do some more. So thanks again, everybody.
All right, everybody. Take care. God bless. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.